Hello, beautiful soul. My name is Yulia, and I'm the voice of the podcast Love to Heal. This podcast outlines my journey from atheism to Judaism, exploring spirituality from diverse perspectives. It is my hope that my journey will inspire others to embark on their own adventure of self-discovery and spiritual growth. Thanks for joining me today on an episode about Jewish adventures in Bogotá, Colombia. In the previous episode, I hope you listened to it, I told you about my Purim celebration in Cartagena, which is a coastal city on the Caribbean Sea. I really enjoyed celebrating Purim in Chabad of Cartagena, but after 3 days of staying in this super hot and humid city, it was time to travel to the mountains, to the capital city, Bogotá. While Colombia is not known for large Jewish communities, Bogotá actually does have a few thousand Jews, and it is the center of Jewish life in this country. They have several synagogues and communal institutions. To contrast with the easygoing vibe of Cartagena and the openness of the Chabad Center there, no security, no passport checks, open gates and doors, everybody's welcome. In comparison to that, Bogotá turned out to be the exact opposite. About a week prior to our trip to Colombia, I decided to reach out to the Chabad Center in Bogotá, thinking it would be just as easy to visit as Cartagena. But instead, I was asked to fill out a 10-page questionnaire asking everything from my passport number, IDs, photos of all documents, letters from my synagogue, and a request for a plethora of other types of information that I just didn't have the time to gather because the form had to be submitted 8 days prior to the arrival. To add to that, we were traveling with another couple, of which one person was not Jewish, and according to the rules mentioned in the form, they could deny entrance into the synagogue to non-Jews. So I became really frustrated with the application process, and I decided not to go through it and find other ways to be Jewish in Bogotá. For one, there were a few kosher eateries in the city, and one of them happened to be very close to where we stayed, which was right next to the epicenter of dining and nightlife. So there we ordered some shawarma with hummus, which definitely satisfied our craving for Israeli flavors. Then we set out to find the oldest Jewish bakery in town. But here is where AI and Google completely let us down. Not only did we not find this establishment, but it seems to have been erased from the history and memories of the Colombian people. We took an Uber to the exact spot that Google Maps suggested, but when I asked around, no one had ever even heard of any Jewish bakeries in the area. So that was really odd. Then our next stop was to be the oldest Jewish cemetery. It was informally known as the Polish cemetery that, according to Google, hosted a Holocaust monument as well. The cemetery was established in 1932 and was the burial ground for Ashkenazi and many Polish Jewish immigrants. Currently, it serves as a historic site with 892 tombs, and, in fact, there is a Holocaust memorial. It was declared a site of national cultural interest by the Ministry of Culture in 1998. The cemetery has a distinct triangular shape, and it includes a central monument dedicated to Holocaust victims. And while historically associated with Ashkenazi immigrants, often referred to as Polish, it serves the broader Jewish community, including members of the Sephardic community. To get there, we took a fairly long Uber drive from our hotel, about 30 minutes, and we arrived in a rather run-down, disadvantaged area. I asked the driver if it was safe to walk the streets there, and he responded sort of uncomfortably that we shouldn't stay there until dark. That was his suggestion. So he dropped us off at the entrance to the cemetery, which was not really visible because it had, I would say, a 15-foot wall with barbed wire on top, surrounding the whole cemetery. The only thing that made it clear that we were in the right place were these huge metal doors with large stars of David on them, and a tiny box like in the wall next to the entrance, which had a little plaque of when the cemetery was built and some other irrelevant information. At first, we were lost as to how to even enter because the gates were shut. There was no doorbell or any way to call. So I tried calling the number provided on Google for the cemetery, but nobody picked up. So we stood around thinking, okay, how do we get inside? Finally, my husband started to bang on the gates, and after a few moments, a man cracked open the door and peeked out with a very surprised look on his face. He first asked if we had made prior arrangements through the Jewish community, which we hadn't. I didn't think that cemeteries needed reservations to visit them, so that was my bad. Then he asked if we had anyone buried there, which we also had not. So then he asked why we wanted to visit there, to which I replied that we were Jewish and that everywhere we traveled, we always visited Jewish establishments and historic sites. The man must have seen how disappointed we were, especially after I told him how far we had come, because then he asked for our passports and asked us to wait outside the gate. So we gave him our passports, and after a little while, he came out telling us that he had called security at the Jewish community so they could run some sort of background check on us and that we should wait for their response. So he locked the doors, he left us outside once again to wait for a reply from his superiors. My husband and I were a little annoyed, but we understood that security is an issue and has been more so recently after October 7th events and the war with Iran and subsequent rising in anti-Semitism worldwide. So we understood that, and we waited and we waited. And then an old lady came out of this 2-story house right across from the cemetery, and she seemed all concerned because we were strangers that she had never seen before, standing outside the cemetery for so long. So she told me she had lived there all her life, some 70 years, and she knew very well the keeper of the cemetery, who had recently retired. Now, she herself was not Jewish, but she knew enough about the cemetery's history, and she explained that only the relatives of those buried are typically allowed in. So we spoke in Spanish. Since I speak Spanish, I explained to her that, we mean no harm. We're just here to visit because we're also Jewish and we're interested in Jewish history, etc. And so after another 10 or 15 minutes, finally the keeper came out, but with bad news. We did not have permission to enter because we should have filled out that 10-page form that I was too lazy and frustrated to complete. But that form would have given us access not only to Bogotá's synagogues, but apparently to all Jewish establishments, including the cemeteries, of which there were several. But my husband and I did not give up so easily. I used my knowledge of Spanish and maybe a little charm to talk the man into at least letting us peek in. The fact that we were in South America helped too, because once we had made it over the threshold, the man hinted that with a little bribe, he would possibly help us out. So what he did was he turned off the security cameras, and then he let us in to the cemetery completely, and we could wander around as long as we wanted. So we gladly gave him a few American dollars, and he happily complied. He asked us to please not take any photos or videos so that he would not get in trouble, and we agreed. And so we walked through the cemetery, and he actually kind of played the role of a tour guide, and he told us some interesting historical facts. He pointed out the oldest graves, showed us the Holocaust Memorial, which is right in the middle of the cemetery. So in the end, it actually all worked out. I was really happy. And interestingly enough, As we were leaving, we looked at the board which listed all the people buried there, and to my surprise, I found several people with my maiden last name, which is quite rare. So that was really cool. And then after completing the short tour, we headed to the hand washing station, as is the Jewish custom. We called an Uber, and then now that the keeper was very nice to us, he allowed us to wait inside the cemetery because it was not a safe area, he admitted. In general, many of our friends and acquaintances were actually surprised that we chose to vacation in Colombia because Colombia does have a reputation of being unsafe. But honestly, we felt very safe most of the time. We used Uber, which is safer than taxis, we found out. We stayed in our little group of 4 wherever we went, and we also chose to visit public areas with lots of people around, or we took tours. I have to admit that I felt safe because I knew God was protecting me, but at the same time, I never forgot what our rabbi told us on several occasions. God gave us, humans, a brain to use. So while you rely on God's protection, don't do stupid things. It comes down to that. It's like that ancient proverb I used in one of my very first podcast episodes. Trust God, but tie your camel. And let me explain a little further what I mean by that. Around the same time of our trip, my husband's coworker also traveled to Colombia, but he ended up having a very distinct experience. First of all, he traveled alone, and to find company, he went on the internet and found some pretty girls to spend time with. He invited them into his hotel room. They quickly drugged him, stole all his possessions, maxed out his credit cards, and took all the money from his checking account. Kid you not. After waking up a day later, not understanding even what happened, it took him a few days just to be able to feel well enough to come out of his room, call his family in the United States, and request funds to make it out of the country. Thank God he came out of this situation alive. But the point is, while God is protecting you, also use your brain to stay out of trouble. Okay, on a happier note, we truly enjoyed the capital city, Bogotá, which is huge. Think New York with some of the best and fanciest eateries I had ever been to, amazing architecture, and modern style design everywhere you look. Fantastic. Literally every cafe, restaurant, and hotel that we entered seemed to be designed by the most incredible designers. Everywhere we went, it was ooh and ah nonstop. So I really do highly recommend Bogota as a vacation or tourist spot. And if you're Jewish, there really is tons to do if you fill out that 10-page form that you're required to. So definitely do that. Don't make my mistake. One of our Uber drivers was very talkative, and we ended up hiring him for a whole day to take us to some incredible sites that should be on the list of wonders of the world. I don't know why they are not. It turned out that our driver had a podcast too on Spotify, and of course we exchanged information and promised to support each other because his podcast was also on spirituality, which was awesome. He took us outside the city to tour the famous lagoon where the legend of El Dorado started in the 16th century. There, the indigenous guide took us through the forest to the lagoon, explaining so much about the indigenous ways of living before and after the Spanish exploration. Much of what he told us, surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, paralleled Judaism. Every time I find parallels between faiths, I'm less and less surprised because at the end of the day, the Torah is literally the blueprint for life. From it, many civilizations diverted, but one way or another, they remain connected to the truth. I'll give you an example. The Muisca people an indigenous civilization in the Andean highlands of Colombia that lived there, maintained and continue to maintain a deeply spiritual and reciprocal relationship with their land, earth, and crops, treating them as living entities that require care, rest, and gratitude. Around the winter solstice, every year they initiate a period of agricultural rest to allow the land to rest, to gain strength and nutrients for the next planting season. In Judaism, there's something called the Shemitah, a sabbatical year, which is a biblical mandate requiring agricultural land in Israel to lie fallow every 7th year, prohibiting sowing, pruning, and commercial harvesting. It emphasizes that the land belongs to God, allowing the needy to eat freely and also fostering rest. Another broader example are the 4 elements of the world: fire, water, air, and earth. In Jewish mysticism and philosophy, the 4 elements are understood as the spiritual and physical building blocks of creation and human personality, rooted in ancient and medieval thought rather than modern chemistry. They represent 4 fundamental energies or inner worlds within the human soul that influence character traits, motivations, and spiritual development. And for the Muisca people, similarly, their spiritual tradition and worldview are deeply connected to the 4 elements too, which represent a connection to their territory, ancestors, and sacred spaces. These elements, preserved in their knowledge and costumes, are fundamental to their spiritual path and understanding of the universe. I could go deeper into each element to show you how similar the core beliefs are of the indigenous and the Jewish people, but hopefully you get the idea, and perhaps if this is of interest to you, you can do further research. At the end of the day, I wish people would realize that we are all interconnected and have the same creator. No one is above anyone else, and we must learn to respect the beliefs of one another. Now, religion-wise, Colombia is predominantly Catholic. And while visiting, we did tour several gorgeous cathedrals, the most impressive one being the Salt Cathedral in a salt mine, which was built 200 meters underground. This site should be amongst the top wonders of the world, in my opinion. Honestly, I don't even know where to start describing it. I suggest you look it up on YouTube because my words will not do justice. And while I'm not Catholic, I can still appreciate what people have done to show their love for God and faith. Pondering the difference between typically modest synagogues and grand cathedrals, I wondered why Jews didn't and don't build such intricate, massive, impressive temples. I found out that firstly, Judaism emphasizes internal spiritual practice over external grandiosity. Also, historically, a less is more approach was adopted, sometimes to avoid idolatry of the building itself. And often, synagogues in Europe were designed to be modest or hidden because opulent structures could incite jealousy, anti-Semitism, or violence. Jewish communities traditionally prioritize investing funds in education, charitable acts, and religious items, such as Torah scrolls, rather than massive building structures. Synagogues are often funded solely by their local congregation, whereas many historic churches were built with state funding or vast church-wide wealth. And to add to that, Judaism emphasizes the home as the center of faith, making the building itself less central than in some Christian traditions. And one more thing I'd like to add here is the important distinction between synagogue, temple, and shul. I used to refer to the synagogue as temple, but once I became a member of Chabad, I was corrected because the Orthodox reserved the word temple exclusively for the ancient temple in Jerusalem, and they maintain hope for its rebuilding. And shul is the Yiddish term for a Jewish synagogue or house of worship, derived from the German word for school, shul. It acts as a Beit Knesset, a gathering place, a prayer house, and a study house. This term is widely used in my Chabad community, so I began to use it as well. The term synagogue, by the way, originates from Greek, meaning assembly, and it is a universal term and can be used by anyone. Finally, I'll say a couple of words about my Jewish practices on this trip to Colombia. This time, in addition to my short daily morning and night prayers, namely Modiani and Shema, as well as short blessings before food, I also worked on my habit of daily hand washing upon rising in the morning. I learned that there is a difference between washing hands then and before eating bread. And let me explain to you the Chabad way. There are a number of reasons for washing hands in the morning, but one of the primary reasons is that when we go to sleep at night, our souls ascend to the heavenly realms to get recharged with renewed energy. At that time, our bodies remain with only the lowest soul powers, those that control our mechanical functions, such as the digestive and respiratory systems. The spiritual vacuum that ensues allows forces of impurity to cleave to the body. When we awaken in the morning, we ritually wash our hands to remove the last vestiges of these foreign influences. The Kabbalists explain that when we wash our hands, these foreign unclean spirits, quote unquote, jump from one hand to the next. Therefore, we alternate between hands in order to eliminate them completely. So you pour on one hand, then the other, then the other, then the other, and you alternate like this 3 times. Whereas for washing before bread, we actually pour 3 times on one hand and 3 times on the other hand. The short explanation is that Jewish law says the minimum amount of water needed for washing is about 2.9 fluid ounces. If you pour that entire amount over each hand in one go, some say that's not enough to purify them. However, if you're using less than that, you need to pour at least twice. Here's why. A small amount of water isn't enough to fully purify your hands. On the contrary, your impure hands will render the water impure. So the second pour is necessary to purify both your hands and the water already on them. Some follow the opinion that even if you use the full amount of water required, the water that stays on your hands is still impure. So to be extra sure, they pour again to purify both their hands and the leftover water. And so we live and we learn, right? Every day I'm learning something new, which makes me appreciate my faith more and more and fascinates me more and more. I hope that I have inspired you to also continue to learn. There's so much. It's so interesting, and it's so wonderful to keep growing and noticing how that growth positively impacts you along the way. I hope that you are able to experience something similar. Thank you very much for listening to my Jewish adventures, and stay tuned for more inspiration and learning. Until next time.